End of My Hero Academia is coming up fast. We're right in the middle of the war arc, a major player has seemingly been taken off the board, and the final showdown is getting closer and closer with each and every chapter. We're all hyped to see the story come to an end, and while it's going to be sad to say goodbye to our favorite characters, it might just get even sadder. What, you thought this story was gonna have a happy ending? You thought you knew what was gonna happen next? I mean, sure, some things are pretty much set in stone at this point. We're gonna see a fight between Deku and Shigaraki, we're gonna see the students and teachers of UA give it their all, but even this close to the end, there is one crucial thing that we cannot be sure of. What happens to the world after we're done? We have spent as much time establishing the setting as we have the cast. Things like the provisional license exams, hero agencies, the top 10 list, and UA's rival schools. This war is in large part over what the world should be. On one side, we have the symbols of peace that want to maintain the hero society that protects the weak. On the other, there are the villains who seek nothing but destruction of the world that hurt them and everything in it. So, what's gonna be left when the dust clears? Will anything be left after that final battle? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. So in this video, we're gonna be breaking down why My Hero Academia's ending might just make you cry. Have you ever really wanted to binge watch an anime but lacked the energy to pull it off? If so, then the sponsor of this video, GamerSupps, has you covered. GamerSupps is a 0-calorie, keto-friendly energy formula that has no carbs, no sugar, no fillers, and no additives. With it being this healthy while maintaining all the benefits of an energy drink, without any of the bad stuff you'll find in the competition, drinking GamerSupps is kinda like having an overpowered anime ability with no drawbacks. And listen, I for one do not do well with caffeine. So when it comes to bringing you some of the best anime and manga content on the platform and making sure you guys have plenty of content to enjoy, the caffeine-free alternative is a product I cannot recommend enough. This caffeine-free line of products allows you to consume more water as you tailor the flavor to your needs without any need to go overboard with the caffeination. In fact, you can enjoy these 120 servings and still manage to get a good night's rest each and every time. To power up on GamerSupps, be sure to use code PLOTARMOR to get a 10% discount on your order. Again, that's code PLOTARMOR for a 10% discount on your order that most definitely helps out the channel. And to help you out, the first 1,000 you guys can use our code to pick out free samples of your flavor of choice. And don't worry, shipping is free too. Thanks to our friends at GamerSupps for sponsoring the video, but now that we're all energized, back to the topic at hand. Let's kick things off with ending 1, A Better Tomorrow. First off is what we all expected to happen as soon as the war arc started. The heroes win. Society returns to largely what it was like before the war began. That makes sense, right? They've been coming out ahead so far, and even if things get more dangerous later on, it's shonen. This is a superhero story. The good guys keep on going, they yell about going beyond, and make it home okay. They might take some losses, have a few heroic sacrifices, but in the end, everything works out for the team, right? It's easy to see how this ending of the story goes. Class 1A standing triumphant over All for One and Shigaraki. We have a brief montage of other heroes to tie things up, showing them starting to repair Japan, then a time skip to 10 years or so in the future. Everyone's doing well. Folks like Toshinori and Gran Torino are happily retired. The UA staff are still teaching. And then we get a montage of this era's pro heroes, ending with Deku standing tall and proud as a symbol of peace for this new world. It's a nice ending, a happy ending, but that does not mean it's gonna happen, and what's worse, as things are now, it probably can't happen. Look, I get it, we all want things to work out, and hey, it's been over 350 chapters of hard work. Deku, along with the rest of Class 1A, have absolutely earned it. We want to see these kids finally achieve their dreams and become pro heroes. We want Deku to finally get to his place as All Might's successor and the symbol of peace. And hey, maybe if you had asked me prior to the war arc, I might have agreed with you that this is most likely the ending of the story. But now? It's still a possibility, but think it through. To get to this point, Deku will have to consecutively defeat All for One, not just in the war, but ideologically. The fact that the villains got this far, caused this much devastation, it's already damaged people's faith in heroes. We've seen heroes retire, die, and fade away. We've seen civilians willing to throw Midoriya to the villains in order to save themselves. We've also seen people stand with the heroes despite everything, but that does not change how bleak the war has gotten. Can Class 1A's victory restore everyday people's faith in the system as a whole? Winning a fight does not necessarily make people trust you. Simply beating the villains will not renew the people's faith in heroes again. It's not clear at this point that anything could. The fight in Jakku City left a lot of people dead, and the breakout from Tartarus just made things worse. Winning now will not bring the dead back or make people feel any safer. Even Deku taking up the mantle as All Might's successor and defeating Shigaraki might not change things. I mean, All Might defeated All for One twice, and the war still happened. Would a new All Might really be enough to make people feel safe again? To restore the world we saw at the start of the series, we're gonna need to see some sort of heroic act bigger than anything we've witnessed so far. Something huge that only the heroes as a group could do that shows us why we still need them. What we're gonna need is a miracle, because if one doesn't happen, the alternatives get bad and bad fast. Now, before we get into the other possible endings, remember to hit subscribe, ring the notification bell, and smash that like button to get your regular dose of plot armor, because trust me, you're gonna need it to get through what's coming. Ending 2. It all returns to nothing. While All For One's victory seems unlikely, Tomura's objective was to destroy the world that made his younger self suffer, first focusing on All Might, then the heroes as a whole, and finally, everything he sees. If no one manages to win the people over, he might just get part of his wish fulfilled even if he loses the fight. There aren't easy answers to a lot of the questions the villains raise. Would a better hero society have stopped the mistreatment of Spinner, Toga, and Twice? Was there anything that could have happened to avert the abuse Shimura Tenko suffered? Some problems can't be solved with a superhero. One of the oldest criticisms of characters like Batman or Iron Man is that they could be doing so much more for society by utilizing their wealth to create societal change, backing charities, and lobbying governments rather than focusing on punching people. It's not that crazy to think that Horikoshi is going to try and address this with the ending here. So if Tomura gets his way and people still distrust heroes after the war, what happens then? Well, even as peace returns to the world, this will still be the death of hero society. The heroes will have kept Japan safe with the conclusion of the war, but it had started with them in control. People would want to be sure that the same thing couldn't happen again, and the status quo would not be enough to satisfy them. They'd want to see more substantive changes. There would be no more hero licensing for a start. People's worries about displaying their quirks openly would increase. There'd be more support for groups like Human Rise and more prejudice against mutants like Spinner as villains waiting to happen. We'd likely see a return to vigilante status for those still insistent on acting as heroes. The police would need new units and tactics to deal with Quirk using threats without the help of heroes. When people are worried about another Shigaraki happening, the force law enforcement uses against criminal Quirk users is likely to get significantly more brutal. With all that being said, there's still room for hope in this ending. When people see flaws in society, some are going to work to change them. This is where we'll probably find Deku in this timeline. Even if he can't be the hero he dreamed of, he's still going to be doing his best to make the world a better place. He'll have some kind of hero adjacent job where he's able to make a difference, perhaps as a fireman or a therapist, something where he can make people smile. And I mean, if that's a criteria, maybe he becomes a clown, although his tears would probably mess up his makeup. Whatever the case may be, most of Class 1A will be right there with him. These are good kids, hero uniforms or not. I can absolutely see Bakugo, Kirishima, and Kaminari ignoring any anti-hero law and becoming a vigilante trio, while people like Momo would take to civilian life a whole lot better. Most of the class would likely fall somewhere between those two extremes. This would be a bleak way to end the series, even in that relatively positive version of events. Deku would have ultimately failed in his dream of becoming the symbol of peace. Even if he's still doing good in a smaller way, that sort of dream being lost feels very not shonen. But this wouldn't be the first story published in Jump to have a bittersweet ending like that. It is possible, and Horikoshi has shown us that he could absolutely make it work. But that's not the outcome we really want, is it? This ending is too depressing. The good ending isn't going to be easy to reach. So what's the alternative? Well, there's one fan idea that crops up a lot that any proper discussion of My Hero Academia's endgame would not be complete without, even if it's not as solid as it may look. Ending 3, Doomsday. Quirk's Singularity Theory. This is something the fandom has been talking about for a while, and an idea Horikoshi has laid out repeatedly. As theorized by Dr. Garaki, All For One's mad scientist, over repeated generations, quirks will grow in power and complexity to the point where they ultimately become unstable and destructive. Since more or less the entire human race is quirks at this point, this would lead to full-on human extinction. A lot of theories within the fandom around the ending of My Hero Academia use the Quirk Singularity as an alternative final boss for the story. Instead of All For One, Deku's big final act will be defeating this threat to the world. He'll go plus ultra and punch the apocalypse in the face. Garaki said this would happen generations in the future, but it's easy to see how this could kick off early. With quirks as powerful as New Order in play, and everyone pushing their abilities beyond their limitations, some kind of premature mass evolution event could happen. Perhaps it would be a final rebuke from All For One, damning the world he could not control. Or maybe the villain finally bites off more than he can chew, pushing his quirk beyond his control, and dragging the world down with him. It sounds plausible. But there's 3 big problems with this idea. First off, it undercuts the story. Even if All for One initiates it, this big world-ending event would upstage him. Instead of an epic culmination to the hero versus villain struggle, the series would end with Deku facing off against an abstract threat. Which then brings us to problem 2. There is no actual way for Deku to punch malfunctioning quirks into submission. The Singularity ending would require some kind of last-minute Deus Ex Machina power-up instead of a proper final battle. It's hard to picture a version of this ending that isn't deeply underwhelming. But even if you look past all of that and think there's a way to make it work, there's one final massive issue with the Quirk Singularity ending. We are a long way into the final arc, and we haven't seen proof Garaki was right about any of this. Now certainly people in the story think he might have a point. We've seen evidence of quirks getting more and more complex over generations. For example, with Bakugo's parents. His explosion quirk combines the effects of both of theirs. Then with the preschool kids the remedial students were put in charge of. Aries' existence and overwhelming power alone makes it clear that quirks are getting stronger and more complicated fast. But that's only half of the theory. It's not been established that the increase in power leads to a lack of control. Bakugo has never been shown to have issues with his quirk. Those preschool kids were monsters and were using their abilities just fine. The only character who has had any issues in that area is Eri. And frankly, the idea her quirk is inherently uncontrollable is dark. That would mean Overhaul was ultimately right. Her power really is a curse she has no hope of using. But there's no proof of that. The more likely explanation for Aries' trouble controlling her quirk is trauma. She had a mishap when first awakening her powers that claimed the life of her father and led to her mother abandoning her with her unfamiliar grandfather. And that mishap, coupled with Shisaki's treatment of her, has left her scared of using Rewind. Aizawa thinks she can work it out with training, and Deku agrees with him. And it's through that belief that she was able to restore the quirk of Lemillion. A sharp knife is really dangerous, right? But use it right and you could make some yummy food. So I think your power is really something special. It shouldn't surprise us that Deku thinks like that. He was handed an uncontrollable quirk too. A power that broke his body every time he used it. But he worked really hard to get it under control. And with training, encouragement, and supportive teachers, he managed it. He could focus it down to his finger in just a few days. With help from Gran Torino, he developed a way to safely handle his quirk without risking his body by going all out. If Deku had any issues with controlling his power, full cowling would not be possible. We have had tons of opportunities to show quirks becoming harder to use. We could have seen one of the kids in the provisional license exam have trouble with their abilities. We could have seen a villain driven to that point on account of not being able to control their powers. But we never have. All we're left with is taking Garaki's word for it. And Garaki is a mad scientist who spent decades working for All for One and manipulated the quirk of his grandson for the sake of producing a winged Nomu. Would you really trust him to get this right? I mean, the whole notion of the masses being unfit for their powers being endorsed by All for One itself may be equated to the villain's own self-righteous delusion that he is the only one suited to possess such capabilities. So, Quirk Singularity, not set up and couldn't be the ending. Well, not so fast. There's an alternative option here, but it's different and kinda out there. It's time to get crazy. Ending 4. A million points of light. Picture it, this exciting new development takes the world by storm. It seems to be everywhere, dominating life, growing newer, shinier, and just playing better every year. But one day, it reaches a tipping point. Things collapse and the world is never the same again. Oh, sorry, my mistake. This isn't the Quirk Singularity. This is the real-world singularity theory. An idea the scientists have been talking about since Professor Werner Vinci came up with the name in the 90s. The short version is that with the rise of computing and the internet in daily life, technology would keep getting more complex and more powerful. Eventually, AI would emerge naturally from it, after which, according to Vinci, the human era will have ended. This idea shows us an alternate version of the Quirk Singularity, one that leads to an ending quite different from Garaki's theory. Quirks are indeed getting stronger with later generations, to the point that new abilities continue to surprise older characters. Instead of getting out of control though, under a Vinci-like model, quirks would grow more refined, more complex to the point that they end up self-aware. And hey, haven't we seen something like that come up already? All for One and One for All both have some kind of sentience within them. While these quirk minds take familiar forms shaped by their existing wielders and drawing on their memory, they are more than just an echo. The previous One for All users can express regret and question Deku's actions. The All for One within Tomura has full control of his body and can act without him even being conscious. So say this is all true. What does this mean for the finale? Well, the first change is the identity of our antagonist. At this point, the person leading the villains in this war is not Tomura Shigaraki or the original All for One. It is the Quirk All for One itself that has become the central threat to the heroes and to the world at large. We only have the implication from its phrasing that the original mind of All for One is still in there and in control. Even if it retains memories of the original, it could easily be its own entity by this point. Perhaps it had been like that even before Tomura's surgery. All we know about All for One has been his quest for power power and control. He still bears an artificial version of his original quirk. Where does the man end and his quirk begin? This would make our final fight two nascent singularities push to their limits, one of which is almost its own being already. If this theory holds, we will hit the point of a true quirk singularity in that fight. One or both of these quirks taking the next evolutionary step and becoming fully independent of its wielder. If that happens, then the very nature of how quirks work could drastically evolve very quickly. Both All For One and One For All have the ability to affect other quirks. A boost such as this could make them even more capable of doing so. A singularity scale All For One would be able to drain quirks in mass very quickly. Singularity One For All, meanwhile, could do the exact opposite. Transmit the great power of the quirk one final time to awaken and empower the rest of the world. And that takes us right back to their names, doesn't it? Either someone takes all the power for themselves, or they give it freely to the world. All for one, or one for all. While it's far more hopeful, the second outcome might be the more horrifying one. This is the Pandora's box of My Hero Academia. If it happens, there is no telling what sort of chaos is going to come from it, or exactly how singularity affected quirks would work. All for One and One for All seem to possess an independent sentience, but that's after they pass through several wielders. From those born with an awakened quirk, it might be very difficult to tell where the person ends and the quirk begins. It wouldn't be two minds in the same body, more like two parts of one mind that work together. Would someone like that still be human? If they instead achieve independent sentience, however, what would that mean for the world? Would those quirk minds continue to support humans? Would they be bound to the human host at all? You'd have a world where every person was essentially two individuals, themselves and their powered self. How would society deal with that? Best case scenario is a world with the power and ability to tackle literally any problem, growing into a new golden age. The worst case is utter anarchy, rampaging quirks, everyday villains with fantastical powers, and people with demons in their head. There are too many variables in exactly how it starts and how it would work. It could be anything from Redestro's wildest dream to Overhaul's worst nightmare. But My Hero Academia is generally a pretty hopeful, optimistic story and tends to be pretty positive about people using their unique powers and talents to do good in the world. Even Professor Vinji has some hope for a positive future after the singularity, that humans themselves will become their own successors, that whatever injustice occurs will be tempered by our knowledge of our roots. Wildcards. We've talked about the big picture options. Let's now take a look at some of the potential wildcard factors as we move towards the end of My Hero Academia. There's a lot of the war arc still to go, and a lot of people whose final fates are still unclear. More than Deku or Shigaraki, their actions could show us what ending we're headed towards. Let's start with Class 1A. If the restoration of Hero Society is going to happen, their role will be crucial. No matter how strong he might be, Deku alone is not enough to change everyone's minds. It'll be the actions of his classmates and younger heroes like him that have more of an impact here. Think of them as a new Hero Society, here to show the people of Japan that there are still heroes ready, willing, and able to keep them safe. The symbol of peace is a distant ideal, but regular heroes are far easier to empathize with and connect to. We'll be getting some moments focused on the younger heroes no matter what, but a fight where a large group of them can all work together would be a big step forward in winning over the public. A disparate group of more grounded figures like Class 1A standing as one against an overwhelming threat is just a sort of moment that shows people, yes, you too can become a hero. If that ends up being witnessed by the public, it will be a strong moment for restoring people's faith in heroes. Defending the refugees in UA against an attack would fit perfectly and seems likely to happen at this point. It probably wouldn't be enough on its own, but it would certainly be a sign the Hero Society isn't done for just yet. Next up, it's the villains. Specifically, I like to draw attention to Spinner and Toga, both as people who could affect the ending and as a sign of what way it might be going. Horikoshi has consistently shown us their side of the conflict, pushing us to feel sympathy for them even as the war continues. While the villains have undoubtedly done terrible things, their final fates will show us what the future world is going to be like. Will they lose themselves in revenge, becoming purely villainous with absolutely no regard for the consequences of their actions? Will we see them start to reconsider their path? Could they even finally reach a breaking point with All for One? Even if they die over the course of the war arc, if we continue to get content framing their point of view sympathetically, it seems like we'll be heading towards a more tragic end with a focus on society changing for the better. There's an outside chance of an ending that blends aspects of hero and villain victory. A conversation between Toga and Hawks about the death of Twice could lay groundwork for this. And a hero like Shoji, as a fellow heteromorph getting to talk to Spinner about what drove him to this point, could do the very same. It could lead to a world where Hero Society survives, but works to reform the issues that gave rise to the League of Villains. This might be the most positive, uplifting ending we could hope for. It gives a measure of validation to the villains' issues and grievances, while letting our heroes work to build a better world. It would be a great way to end the series, although it may be a long shot given the magnitude of the war. Hurt and pain on both sides will make understanding and empathy infinitely harder. But it is possible, and Deku himself wants to take this path, so let's not discount it just yet. Finally, if the Quirk Singularity is going to be a thing, we will absolutely be seeing more of both the past wielders of One for All and the All for One inner mindscape, setting up the idea of the quirks being separate entities. Conflict within Tomura and All for One is inevitable, but an argument between the past One for All users could show their development towards this point. We'd also likely get more time with the human All for One, setting up any contrast between him and the version of him controlling Tomura. More appearances or involvement from Garaki, more discussion of the Quirk Singularity, or the philosophy behind quirks could also be a sign of Horikoshi setting up for the Singularity as an ending. However, we're probably going to get these things no matter what. Garaki is an important character regardless of his theory. He is All for One's lieutenant, creator of the Nomu, and one of the main villains of the story. If we spend a lot of time with him, or the conversation focuses on the idea of Garaki being wrong, we could be looking at a sign of this alternative singularity. But him simply appearing could go any number of ways. But yeah, this has been our big overview of what might happen after the war is over. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.